A mafia boss lived alone for 30 years until he saw a woman beaten for being infertile. But when he steps out of the shadows that night, everything changes in a single heartbeat. The most feared man in the city, cold, silent, untouchable, suddenly does something no one has seen him do before. He rescues her, not because he's a hero, but because something inside him finally cracks. She wakes up in a mansion no one has entered in decades. The gates are locked. The guards fear the man who brought her here, and for the first time ever, he's breaking all his own rules to protect a woman who never asked for his help. But the family who hurt her wants her back, and when they come knocking, they discover the truth. She didn't just catch the attention of a mafia boss. She became the one thing he's willing to kill for. What happens when the most dangerous man in the city finally finds something worth fighting for, and something worth losing? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Through the tinted windows of his Bentley, Marco Venturi watched his men unload crates from the delayed shipment. The autumn wind whistled through the industrial district, carrying the bitter scent of the harbor. Even in the dim warehouse lighting, nothing escaped his attention. Not the slight tremor in his youngest soldier's hands, nor the wary glances the workers cast in his direction. He stepped out of the car, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the concrete. The workers straightened immediately, their movements becoming more precise, more careful. Fear was a familiar companion in his world, and he had learned to wield it like a finely honed blade. "Sir," his warehouse manager approached, clipboard in hand. "The manifest shows everything accounted for despite the delay." Marco nodded once, his expression unchanging. "Ensure it's verified." Twice. His voice was quiet, controlled, the same tone he used for both business dealings and death sentences. The interior of the warehouse felt cavernous, its high ceilings disappearing into shadows. Marco moved between the stacked crates with practiced efficiency, occasionally running a hand along their surfaces. Each touch was deliberate, checking for signs of tampering. 30 years of survival in this business had taught him that details meant the difference between life and death. The inspection complete, Marco returned to his car. The city lights blurred past as he drove toward the outskirts, where his estate stood like a fortress against the darkening sky. The iron gates opened silently at his approach, security cameras tracking his every move. He hadn't allowed anyone past these gates in 3 decades, not since that night when trust had cost him everything. The mansion's grand foyer echoed with his solitary footsteps. Paintings worth millions lined the walls, their beauty lost on empty hallways. His housekeeper had left his dinner in the warming drawer, as she did every evening before departing. Marco sat at the head of a table meant for 20, the silence broken only by the subtle scrape of silver against fine china. After dinner, he retreated to his study. The security feeds from his various properties filled multiple screens, a digital web of protection and control. He watched the feeds methodically, searching for any irregularity, any threat to his empire. This nightly ritual had become as natural as breathing. The clock struck midnight, and Marco rose from his desk. The autumn air had grown colder, but he didn't reach for a coat as he stepped onto the grounds. His midnight walk along the estate's perimeter was sacred, the only time he allowed his guard to lower slightly, though the Beretta remained holstered at his side. The manicured gardens cast strange shadows in the moonlight. Marco moved through them like a ghost, his thoughts drifting to ledgers, territories, and the endless chess game of power. These walks were his version of meditation, the closest thing to peace he allowed himself. His phone vibrated, a specific pattern that indicated urgent business. Marco's jaw tightened as he answered, his voice clipped. "Speak." "Movement near Warehouse 7, boss," his security chief reported. "Could be nothing, but the pattern's suspicious. 3 individuals, possibly armed." "I'm 10 minutes out," Marco replied, already striding toward his car. "Monitor but don't engage." The drive to the warehouse district was quick at this hour, though Marco's mind raced faster than his vehicle. Warehouse 7 housed legitimate goods, furniture imports, but its location made it valuable for monitoring rival activities. A breach there could signal various threats, none of them acceptable. He parked 2 blocks away, moving on foot through the shadows with the silence of a predator. The warehouse loomed ahead, its surrounding alleys dark and narrow. Marco drew his Beretta, the familiar weight centering him as he approached. The scream cut through the night, female, desperate, pleading for mercy. Marco's finger settled on the trigger as he moved toward the sound, his breath steady, despite the surge of adrenaline. In 30 years, he had heard countless screams, but something about this one was different. It held a note of innocence that didn't belong in his world. He pressed against the cold brick wall, edging toward the alley's entrance. The woman's sobs echoed off the walls, accompanied by harsh male laughter. Marco's expression remained impassive, but his grip on the Beretta tightened. He had built his empire on control of his territories, his emotions, his responses. But as he prepared to round the corner, something stirred in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation he couldn't quite name. The security cameras would record whatever happened next, adding to the digital archive of violence that marked his reign. But for the first time in decades, Marco felt a flicker of uncertainty. Not about what he would do, that was never in question, but about how this moment might change the carefully ordered world he had built. Time seemed to slow as he listened to the woman's pleas. Each sob scraped against something long buried, something he had locked away with his humanity 30 years ago. His heart maintained its steady rhythm, his breathing remained controlled, but deep inside, hairline cracks began to form in walls he had thought impenetrable. The alley waited, dark and expectant. Marco stood perfectly still, gathering intelligence through sound alone. 3 male voices, 1 female. The shuffle of feet on concrete, the distinctive click of a weapon being checked. He categorized each detail automatically, his mind already formulating tactical responses. The woman screamed again, the sound raw and primal. Marco's finger caressed the trigger of his Beretta, muscle memory from countless similar moments. But this time felt different. This time the scream seemed to echo in chambers he had thought long empty. He thought of his empty mansion, of dinners eaten in silence, of security feeds showing nothing but shadows and secrets. For 30 years, he had convinced himself that solitude was strength, that isolation was the price of power. Yet here, in this dark alley on this cold autumn night, something shifted, subtle but seismic, like the first tremor before an earthquake. The laughter of the men grew louder, more cruel. Marco's jaw clenched, a minute tell that no one alive would recognize. He had built his reputation on being untouchable, unknowable. His enemies called him the Ghost, always present but never seen, deadly but impossible to grasp. He had embraced that identity, wrapped it around himself like armor. But now, as he stood in the shadows, listening to a stranger's terror, Marco felt the weight of 30 years of solitude. Each sob that echoed off the alley walls seemed to strike against the fortress he had built around himself. Not enough to breach it, nothing could do that, but enough to make him aware of its existence in a way he hadn't been for decades. The autumn wind carried the scent of the harbor, mixed now with fear and violence. Marco inhaled slowly, letting the familiar cocktail of danger center him. He had walked this path countless times, would walk it countless more. It was his territory, his responsibility, his burden to bear alone. Yet something was different about tonight. Perhaps it was the way the woman's voice cracked with genuine terror, or how the autumn cold seemed to seep deeper than usual into his bones. Whatever it was, it made him grip his Beretta tighter, made his steps more deliberate as he prepared to round the corner. The security cameras would capture what happened next, adding another chapter to his legend. But for the first time in 30 years, Marco Venturi felt something stir beneath the ice of his carefully maintained control. It wasn't enough to change him. He was far too hardened for that. But it was enough to make him aware of all he had sacrificed for power. The woman sobbed again, closer now. Marco's muscles tensed, ready for action. He had built an empire on decisive moments like these, on choices made in dark alleys with only his conscience as witness. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, the weight of his solitude pressed against him like a physical thing, even as he prepared to do what needed to be done. The alley waited, holding its secrets in shadow. Marco Venturi, feared boss of the city's underworld, stood poised on its threshold, his Beretta ready, his mind clear. Whatever happened next would be recorded, analyzed, added to the legend that kept his enemies at bay and his allies in line. But for this moment, suspended between action and consequence, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of 30 years of chosen isolation. Marco stepped out of the shadows, his footsteps silent on the wet pavement. The scene before him made his blood run cold. Not from fear, but from a deep, simmering rage he hadn't felt in decades. 3 men surrounded a woman who knelt on the dirty ground, their shadows stretching like demons across the alley walls. Her dark hair hung in tangles around her face, and even in the dim light, Marco could see the blood trickling from her split lip. Behind them stood an older woman, her arms crossed, watching the scene with the detached interest of someone observing insects being crushed. Please, the young woman begged, her voice hoarse from screaming. I didn't do anything wrong. Please stop. Her words dissolved into a sob as one of the men grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. Shut up, he snarled. You had one job, one simple job. Give our brother an heir, but you can't even do that right, can you? Another man, nearly identical to the first, spat on the ground near her feet. Useless. That's what you are, nothing but a barren waste of space. The woman on her knees trembled, but something in her posture caught Marco's attention. Even beaten and terrified, she held herself with a quiet dignity that stirred something ancient and dangerous inside him. He had seen countless acts of violence in his time, had ordered many himself, but this mindless cruelty, awakened to fury, he thought long dead. 2 years, the third brother sneered, cracking his knuckles. 2 years of nothing but disappointment. Mother was right. We should have dealt with you months ago. The older woman, their mother, finally spoke, her voice as cold as the autumn wind. Finish it. We'll tell Giuseppe she ran away. No one will question it. Marco had seen enough. He moved forward, each step precisely placed, his presence suddenly filling the alley like a gathering storm. The brothers noticed him too late, their eyes widening as they recognized who had stumbled upon their family. Matter. Venturi, one of them whispered, the name carrying all the weight of a death sentence. Marco didn't waste words. His first move was surgical, a strike to the nearest brother's throat that left him gasping on the ground. The second came at him with a knife, but Marco caught his wrist, twisted until bones snapped like dry twigs, and slammed him face first into the brick wall. Blood sprayed across the weathered stone. The third brother managed to pull a gun, but Marco was already moving. He disarmed him with practiced efficiency, using the man's own momentum to throw him off balance. The gun clattered away into the shadows. Marco followed through with an elbow to the temple that dropped the last attacker like a stone. Throughout it all, his breathing never quickened. His expression never changed. This was business, nothing more. Yet when he turned to face the mother, something in his eyes made her step back, her composure cracking. Leave, he said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of 3 decades of absolute authority. Take your sons, those who can still walk and go. But remember this, she is under my protection now. If any harm comes to her, I will dismantle your family piece by piece. The mother's face twisted with hate, but fear won out. She hurried to help her least injured son drag the others away, leaving trails of blood on the wet pavement. Only then did Marco turn his full attention to the woman still kneeling on the ground. He crouched beside her, moving slowly to avoid startling her. Up close, he could see the delicate features beneath the bruising, the intelligence in her eyes despite their glassy shock. What's your name? He asked, keeping his voice gentle, as if speaking to a wounded animal. She looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her gaze made him feel seen in a way he hadn't experienced in 30 years. Her voice was barely a whisper when she answered, Elena. Elena, he repeated, tasting the name. You're safe now. Can you stand? She tried, but her legs buckled beneath her. Without hesitation, Marco slipped one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. She felt small in his arms, fragile, yet there was a core of strength in how she held herself, even now. The walk to his car seemed longer than usual, each step measured to avoid jostling her. He could feel her breath growing shallower, her body growing heavier, as consciousness began to slip away. By the time he reached his vehicle, her head had fallen against his chest, her eyes fluttering closed. Marco looked down at her face, now peaceful in unconsciousness, and felt those same hairline cracks from earlier spreading deeper through his carefully constructed walls. For 30 years, he had lived in perfect isolation, had turned his solitude into a weapon as sharp as any blade. Yet here he was, carrying a stranger to safety, letting her blood stain his expensive suit, breaking his own. Rules about involvement in others' affairs. The city lights cast moving shadows across Elena's face as Marco gently placed her in the passenger seat of his car. Each shadow seemed to highlight a different aspect of her features, the proud line of her jaw, the gentle curve of her cheek, the strength hidden beneath her current vulnerability. He found himself memorizing these details with the same precision he usually reserved for studying enemy positions or planning tactical strikes. As he walked around to the driver's side, Marco caught his reflection in the window. The same cold, composed face that had stared back at him for decades looked no different. Yet everything had changed. He had changed in ways he couldn't yet understand, the moment he decided to step out of those shadows and into her story. The engine purred to life, its familiar sound somehow altered by the presence of another person in his carefully maintained space. Elena's head lolled against the leather headrest, a strand of dark hair falling across her face. Without thinking, Marco reached out to brush it aside, his fingers hovering just above her skin, before he caught himself and returned his hand to the steering wheel. The night pressed against the windows as he pulled away from the alley, leaving behind 3 broken men and 30 years of carefully maintained solitude. Elena's soft, uneven breathing filled the car, each inhale a reminder of the choice he had just made, a choice that would shatter the controlled isolation he had built his empire upon. Elena drifted into consciousness slowly, like swimming up through deep water. The first thing she noticed was softness, a bed far more luxurious than anything she'd ever known. Late morning sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, casting golden patterns across silk sheets that felt foreign against her skin. Her head throbbed. When she tried to move, sharp pains shot through her ribs and face. Carefully, she lifted a hand to touch her cheek, finding bandages expertly applied. More wrappings encircled her torso beneath the silk nightgown someone had dressed her in. The room itself was massive, decorated in shades of cream and gold. A crystal chandelier hung from the coffered ceiling, and heavy wooden furniture spoke of old money and refined taste. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, she glimpsed manicured gardens surrounded by high stone walls. Where was she? The last thing she remembered was the alley, the pain, and then a man. A dangerous man who had moved like death itself, yet had spoken to her so gently. The bedroom door opened silently, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. The man from last night entered, his presence filling the room instantly. In daylight, she could see him clearly for the first time. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that did nothing to hide his physical power. Silver threaded through his dark hair at the temples, and his face could have been carved. From marble, beautiful, but utterly unyielding. Only his eyes held any warmth, and even that seemed carefully measured. "Good morning," he said, his voice deep and smooth. "How are you feeling?" Elena pulled the sheets higher, though she was fully covered. "Where am I? Who are you?" "My name is Marco Venturi." He moved to stand near the foot of the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "You're in my home, and you're safe here." The name hit her like a physical blow. Everyone in the city knew that name, spoke it in whispers. Marco Venturi, the Shadow King who ruled the underground with cold precision, the man whose estate had become legendary because no one had entered it in 30 years. 30 years? She whispered, not meaning to speak aloud. A slight smile touched his lips. "Yes, you're the first person I've brought here in 3 decades. The circumstances seem to warrant breaking my own rules." Elena's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of last night. The alley, my husband's brothers, were beating you while their mother watched. His voice hardened. "They won't touch you again." "You killed them?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "No, though they may wish I had." He moved to the window, gazing out at his grounds. "They're alive, but they'll carry reminders of last night for the rest of their lives. I made it clear that you're under my protection now." Protection. The word should have been comforting, but it sent a chill down Elena's spine. She knew what protection meant in their world. It meant ownership. "I need to go home," she said, pushing back the covers despite the pain. "Thank you for helping me, but I can't stay here." Marco turned back to her, his expression unchanged. "Elena, you can't go back to people who tried to kill you." "They weren't trying to kill me," she protested weakly, even though she wasn't sure that was true. "It was just discipline. For not giving their son an heir." Something dangerous flickered in Marco's eyes. "Discipline? Is that what you call 3 men beating a woman half their size while their mother supervises?" Elena stood shakily, grateful for the long nightgown that preserved her modesty. "You don't understand. They're my family now. I have obligations." "Your only obligation is to stay alive," he interrupted softly. "And you won't be if you go back." She walked to the door on unsteady legs, ignoring how the room spun slightly. The handle turned easily, but beyond lay a long hallway that seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions. Crystal sconces and priceless artwork lined the walls, creating an atmosphere of beautiful imprisonment. "The estate gates are locked," Marco said behind her, his voice gentle but firm. "The security system requires my authorization for anyone to enter or leave. My men guard the perimeter 24 hours a day. You cannot leave, Elena. Not until I'm certain you're safe." The words settled over her like a weighted blanket, both comforting and suffocating. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the bandages beneath the silk, physical reminders of why she was here. "So I'm your prisoner?" she asked, not turning around. "No, you're my guest." He paused, then added, "Though I acknowledge the distinction may seem academic at the moment." Elena's legs trembled, threatening to give out. Marco moved forward as if to steady her, but she flinched away. He immediately stepped back, maintaining the distance she needed. "There's a bathroom through that door," he said, indicating a door to the left of the bed. "Clean clothes are in the wardrobe. The doctor who treated you last night left pain medication on the nightstand. Please take it. You have 3 cracked ribs that need to heal." His phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, then back at her. "I need to take this call. Ring the bell by the bed if you need anything. Someone will bring you breakfast shortly." He moved to the door with fluid grace, pausing in the threshold. "Elena, I know the situation isn't ideal, but sometimes safety comes in forms we don't expect or initially welcome." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the beautiful room that was both sanctuary and cage. Elena sank into a plush armchair by the window, hugging herself tightly as she tried to process her new reality. Through the glass, she could see armed men patrolling the grounds, their weapons visible even at this distance. The high stone walls suddenly seemed more prison-like than protective. Had she been saved or captured? The line between the two felt as gauzy as the curtains filtering the late morning sun. Marco Venturi had quite possibly saved her life, yet now he held that life in his hands just as surely as her husband's family had. The only difference was the gilded nature of this cage and the unsettling gentleness of her new captor. She touched the bandages on her face again, remembering how carefully he had spoken to her in the alley, how gently he had lifted her into his car. No one had shown her such care in years. Yet this was Marco Venturi, the man whose very name made hardened criminals tremble. What did he want from her? What price would his protection ultimately demand? The sun climbed higher in the sky as Elena sat motionless, watching shadows shift across the manicured lawn. She felt suspended between gratitude and fear, salvation and captivity, unable to determine which emotion should take precedence. The pain medication beckoned from the nightstand, but she left it untouched, needing the clarity of mind that even discomfort brought. Somewhere in the massive house, Marco Venturi was speaking on his phone, making decisions that would undoubtedly affect her future. The thought should have terrified her more than it did. Instead, she found herself remembering the way he had crouched beside her in the alley, how his voice had gentled when he asked her name. How could hands capable of such violence also hold such careful restraint? The questions swirled in her mind like the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams, each one leading to another with no clear answers in sight. She was safe, yet confined, protected, yet possessed, rescued, yet restricted. The paradox of her situation settled around her like the silk of her borrowed nightgown, smooth and soft on the surface, but with steel threads woven invisibly throughout. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Marco's study as Rocco Moretti entered, his usual composed expression fracturing into shock at the news his boss had just delivered. "A woman?" Rocco's voice cracked slightly. "Here? In the mansion?" Marco stood by the window, his broad shoulders tense beneath his tailored suit. "Elena Bianchi, she needed protection." "Marco," Rocco began carefully, "no one has crossed that threshold in 30 years. Not since—" "Choose your next words with extreme care," Marco cut him off, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He turned slowly, fixing Rocco with a stare that had made harder men crumble. "Elena is under my protection. Anyone who questions that decision will be executed. Is that clear?" Rocco swallowed hard, nodding. "Crystal clear, boss. But the implications, handle them." Marco's tone left no room for discussion. "And find everything you can about her husband's family. I want to know why they were beating her in that alley." Meanwhile, upstairs, Elena stood under the shower's steaming spray, watching pink-tinged water swirl down the drain. The marble bathroom was bigger than her entire bedroom at home, its luxury both soothing and unsettling. She used the expensive soap and shampoo, letting the hot water ease her aching muscles. After drying off, she found clothes laid out on the bed, designer pieces in her size, tags still attached. The simple act of pulling on soft black pants and a cream sweater made her feel more human, more herself. But as she began exploring the mansion's vast corridors, that feeling of normalcy quickly evaporated. The house was immaculate, yet eerily empty. No family photos adorned the walls, only carefully curated artwork. No magazines lay scattered on coffee tables, no mail piled up on side tables. Everything was precise, controlled, sterile. It was less a home than a museum of wealth and power. Elena's footsteps echoed on the marble floors as she wandered. Every room told the same story. Perfect order, no personal touches, no signs of life beyond the cleaning staff, who must maintain this mausoleum of luxury. She found libraries filled with leather-bound books that looked untouched, sitting rooms where no one sat, dining rooms where no one dined. At precisely 12 o'clock, a maid appeared to escort her to lunch. Marco was already seated at the massive dining table, reading documents while he ate. He gestured for Elena to join him, not looking up. She sat, staring at the elaborate place setting before her. "You can't keep me here," she said finally, her voice stronger than she expected. Marco set down his papers, meeting her gaze. "You are staying until you can stand on your own feet," he replied with chilling calm. His tone was gentle, almost kind, which somehow made it more frightening. "That is not negotiable. I have a job, a life, both of which can wait until you're healed and safe." He gestured to her barely touched plate. "Eat. You need to regain your strength." Elena picked up her fork, more to have something to do with her hands than from actual hunger. "Why are you doing this?" Marco was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Because I could not watch them kill you," he said finally. "And make no mistake, that's what would have happened if I hadn't intervened." The rest of lunch passed in tense silence. Elena retreated to her room afterward, trying to process her situation. As evening fell, she lay in bed, staring at the ornate ceiling, sleep eluding her despite her exhaustion. Just before midnight, voices in the hallway caught her attention. Marco's distinctive tone, speaking on the phone, made her hold her breath to listen. "If he files a report, I'll erase his family from this city." The words were spoken with the same calm he'd used at lunch, but now that tranquility carried death in it. "No, I don't care about the consequences. She stays here. Handle it." Elena's heart hammered in her chest as Marco's footsteps moved away. She lay rigid in the massive bed, suddenly wide awake, the full weight of her situation crushing down on her. She wasn't just in Marco Venturi's home. She was at the center of a brewing war. A war she never wanted between men who dealt in violence and death. Rocco's voice from earlier that day drifted back to her through the walls. "The other families won't understand this, Marco. Taking in a stranger, especially someone's wife." "Then help them understand," Marco had replied. "Or help them die. Their choice." Now in the dark, Elena wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop shaking. The bruises from her beating throbbed dully, a reminder of what she'd fled. But had she jumped from one dangerous situation into something even worse? Marco's protection meant safety from her husband's family, but at what cost to others? To herself? She thought of the empty halls, the rooms devoid of life, the 30 years of solitude that had shaped this fortress. What had happened to make Marco Venturi seal himself away from the world? And why had he broken that isolation for her? Outside, the guards made their rounds, their shadows passing periodically across her window. The mansion's security systems hummed quietly, an ever-present reminder of her gilded cage. Somewhere in this massive house, Marco Venturi was probably still awake, moving pieces on the chessboard of power, making calls that would reshape the city's underworld, all because he'd chosen to save her. Elena rolled onto her side, wincing at the pain in her ribs. The silk sheets whispered against her skin, another reminder of how far she was from her normal life. In just 24 hours, she'd gone from being trapped in an abusive marriage to being protected by one of the most dangerous men in the country. The irony might have made her laugh if it wasn't so terrifying. A cloud passed over the moon, casting the room into deeper shadow. In that darkness, Elena faced the truth she'd been avoiding since she woke up in this place. She was now a catalyst for violence, a reason for bloodshed, a prize to be protected or claimed. Her very presence in this house had already set forces in motion that she couldn't control or fully understand. The night stretched endlessly ahead, promising no rest, no peace. Just the weight of knowing that somewhere out there, men were already plotting, moving, preparing for whatever war Marco Venturi had just declared. All because he'd found her broken and bleeding in an alley and decided she was worth saving. Elena turned her face into the pillow, but sleep remained impossibly far away. She was safe, yes. But safety, she was learning, came with its own kind of terror. The morning sun cast long shadows through the mansion's windows as Elena made her way downstairs. Her body ached less today, though the bruises had darkened to angry purples and blues. She paused at the sound of voices from Marco's study, stern, urgent tones that made her stomach clench. "They're claiming kidnapping," a man was saying. "Antonio Bianchi filed the report an hour ago." Elena's breath caught. She edged closer to the partially open door, knowing she shouldn't eavesdrop, but unable to stop herself. "Let them claim what they want," Marco's voice cut through the room, cold as steel. "We have security footage of their men beating her in that alley, their own mother watching it happen." "The Bianchis are mobilizing," another voice added. "Our scouts report increased activity at their compounds. They're calling in favors." "Then we call in more." Marco's chair scraped against the floor. "Double the perimeter guards. I want eyes on every Bianchi operation in the city. If they so much as jaywalk, I want to know about it." Elena's hands trembled. She pushed the door open, making all 4 men turn toward her. Marco's advisors tensed, but Marco himself simply watched her with those unnervingly calm eyes. "You can't do this," she said, hating how her voice shook. "I don't want anyone fighting because of me." Marco dismissed his men with a slight nod. They filed past Elena, avoiding eye contact. When the door clicked shut, Marco gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit," he said, softer than the tone he'd used with his men. "You should be resting." "I'm fine." Elena remained standing. "But this has to stop. The violence, the threats. I never wanted any of it. They spilled yours first." Marco's words were quiet but final. He stood, moving around his desk with that fluid grace that made him seem more dangerous than any shouting could. "The doctor will be here in an hour to check your injuries." "I don't need—" "Elena." Just her name, spoken gently, but it stopped her protests. "Let me handle this." Before she could argue further, his phone buzzed. Marco checked it, his expression hardening. "Eat something. The kitchen staff has prepared breakfast." He was already dialing as she left the study, his voice falling back into that deadly calm tone he used for business. Elena found herself in the massive kitchen where a quiet woman placed a plate of eggs and toast in front of her. The food was perfect, not too heavy, easy on her tender jaw. Just like the clothes that had appeared in her room, sized exactly right. Just like the way Marco somehow knew when to push and when to step back. Throughout the day, Elena noticed more of these small considerations. Marco spoke to everyone else in clipped commands, but his voice always softened when addressing her. He appeared periodically to ensure she was comfortable, had eaten, wasn't in pain. When the doctor arrived, a nervous man who kept glancing at Marco hovering in the doorway, every instruction was followed to the letter. "The ribs are bruised, not broken," the doctor reported. "The facial injuries are superficial. She needs rest, good nutrition, and time to heal." Marco nodded once. "She'll have it." By evening, the constant surveillance was suffocating. Elena waited until Marco was occupied with another phone call, then slipped through the mansion's winding hallways. She'd noticed a small garden door earlier, less obvious than the main gates. The security keypad beside it looked simpler too. Her heart pounding, Elena tried the handle. To her shock, it turned. She pushed the door open, tasting freedom, and found Marco leaning against the garden gate, as if he'd been waiting for her. "The city isn't safe right now," he said quietly. No anger in his voice, just that same gentle patience he'd shown all day. "The Bianchis have men watching every street." "How did you?" Elena gestured helplessly at his presence. A slight smile touched his lips. "I've spent 30 years perfecting the security system. Every door, every window, every movement is monitored." As if to prove his point, his phone chimed with an alert. Marco checked it, his expression darkening. "They're testing the perimeter again. Come inside." Elena let him guide her back into the mansion with a light touch on her elbow. Through the windows, she caught glimpses of guards moving with new urgency, responding to whatever threat had been detected. "Why do you care what happens to me?" she asked suddenly, turning to face him. "Why risk a war with the Bianchis?" Marco studied her for a long moment. In the fading daylight, shadows played across his features, making him look older, wearier. "Because 30 years ago, I watched someone die because I didn't act fast enough. I won't make that mistake again." Before Elena could process this revelation, another alert pinged. Marco's phone lit up with messages, more security warnings, more threats to address. The war she never wanted was already here, circling the walls of her gilded cage, while the man beside her prepared to fight it with the same quiet intensity he showed in everything else. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, watching Marco read through the alerts. She thought about the empty halls, his gentle voice, the way he anticipated her needs before she voiced them. Somewhere in this fortress of a man was a pain that matched her own, a wound that had driven him into 3 decades of solitude. Now he was breaking that solitude for her, risking everything he'd built to keep her safe. Elena wasn't sure if that knowledge terrified her more than the threats outside these walls, or if it offered a strange comfort she wasn't ready to examine too closely. "Come," Marco said softly. "It's not safe near the windows after dark." As he led her deeper into the mansion's shelter, Elena realized she'd stopped thinking of escape. Whether that was wisdom or weakness, she couldn't say. But as another security alert echoed through the house, proof that the Bianchis were indeed probing for weaknesses, she found herself grateful for the walls around her and the man who'd made himself their guardian. Outside, the city held its breath, waiting to see what price would be paid for Elena's protection. Inside, she followed Marco through his fortress, wondering if she'd ever understand the complexities of the man who'd appointed himself her protector, or if understanding him would make her situation more dangerous rather than less. The security system hummed quietly, a constant reminder of the barriers between her and the world. But as Elena watched Marco check another alert, his movements precise and controlled, she wondered if some barriers were meant to keep danger out rather than keep her in. The distinction felt important, even if she couldn't quite grasp why. Elena jerked awake, her heart hammering against her ribs. In her dream, hands had been grabbing at her again, voices hissing about duty and shame. The bedroom's unfamiliar shadows made her pulse spike until memory filtered back. Marco's mansion, safety, protection. A soft creak outside her door made her freeze. Through the gap beneath, she could see a shadow. Carefully, Elena slipped from the bed and approached. When she eased the door open, she found Marco sitting in an armchair, alert despite the exhaustion evident in the shadows under his eyes. "You are having nightmares," he said quietly, not moving from his position. "Have you been here all night?" He didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. Elena noticed his usually pristine suit was slightly rumpled, his tablet resting on the side table, showing security feeds. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." His voice remained soft, careful, so different from the tone she'd heard him use with his men. Breakfast was served in the formal dining room, the massive table making the space between them feel even larger. Elena watched Marco mechanically cut his eggs into precise squares, his movements controlled as always. But there was something different about him this morning, tiny tells that suggested his perpetual composure wasn't quite as perfect as usual. "The coffee is good," she offered, trying to break the heavy silence. Marco looked up, seeming almost startled by her attempt at conversation. "Yes, it's imported from Colombia." He paused awkwardly, then added, "I can have different varieties brought in if you prefer something else." "This is fine." Elena hid a small smile behind her cup. The feared Mafia boss, struggling with small talk over breakfast. Throughout the morning, she caught him watching her. Quick, intense glances when he thought she wouldn't notice. Every time she moved, his attention followed, though he tried to mask it behind his tablet or phone. It was like being stalked by a very polite predator who couldn't quite decide what to do with his prey. By afternoon, the endless sitting and waiting had Elena climbing the walls. She needed to do something, anything, to feel normal again. When she found the kitchen, industrial-grade equipment gleaming under bright lights, an idea took hold. "I want to cook dinner," she announced, finding Marco in his study. He looked up sharply. "The staff can handle meals." "I need to feel human again, to do something with my hands that isn't just existing in this golden cage." Marco's jaw tightened, but something in her expression made him relent. "Very well, but the kitchen staff will assist." "No, just me, please." He studied her for a long moment before nodding once. "I'll have the kitchen cleared." Elena lost herself in the familiar motions of cooking, the simple act of creating something making her feel more grounded than she had in days. She was so focused on slicing vegetables that she didn't notice the knife slipping until sharp pain blazed across her palm. "Damn it!" She grabbed a nearby towel, but before she could wrap it around her hand, Marco was there. She hadn't even heard him enter, but suddenly he was beside her, his larger frame crowding close as he captured her wounded hand in his. "Let me see." "It's just a small cut." "Let me see." His voice carried that edge of command that probably made hardened criminals tremble, but his touch remained gentle as he examined her palm. "Doctor!" The roar made Elena jump. Marco's free hand came up to steady her shoulder while he continued holding her injured hand like it was made of glass. "Now!" The doctor arrived in record time, looking distinctly nervous as Marco hovered over the examination. The cut wasn't deep enough for stitches, but Marco insisted on proper bandaging, his eyes never leaving the process. "It's really not that serious," Elena tried to reassure him, struck by the intensity of his reaction. Marco's gaze finally lifted to her face, and Elena's breath caught. They were standing so close she could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. His hand was still cradling hers, thumb brushing absently over her wrist where her pulse raced. The moment stretched, charged with something Elena didn't dare name. Marco's eyes dropped to her lips, then snapped back up. She swayed slightly closer without meaning to, drawn by some magnetic pull she couldn't explain. Then Marco stepped back, releasing her hand as if it burned. "You should rest. Dinner will be served in your room." "But I wasn't finished." "You will rest." His tone brooked no argument, though it still held that softness he seemed to reserve only for her. Later that night, Elena lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, troubled by the day's revelations. The man who'd sat guard outside her door, who'd stumbled through breakfast conversation, who'd reacted with such fierce protectiveness over a simple cut. He didn't match the cold, ruthless figure she'd heard whispered about in fearful tones. More troubling was how safe she felt in his presence, despite knowing what he was capable of. She'd seen him break men with casual efficiency that first night, yet his hands had been so gentle examining her cut. His voice could make hardened criminals scramble to obey, yet it softened to velvet when he spoke to her. Elena touched the bandage on her palm, remembering the way he'd held her hand like it was something precious. The world feared Marco Venturi, and with good reason. But as she drifted toward sleep, she couldn't reconcile that fearsome reputation with the man who'd kept vigil outside her door, who'd looked at her with such intensity it made her breath catch, who treated her like something rare and valuable to be protected at all costs. Perhaps that disconnect should have frightened her more. Instead, she found herself wondering what other surprises lay beneath his carefully maintained facade of ice. The thought followed her into dreams that, for the first time since her arrival, held no terror, only the phantom sensation of strong hands holding hers with impossible gentleness, and dark eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. In the darkness outside her door, Marco resumed his silent watch, and Elena slept peacefully through the night. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Marco's study, painting golden stripes across the antique hardwood floor. Elena curled deeper into the oversized leather armchair, a leather-bound copy of Pride and Prejudice open in her lap. She'd found it in the library, one of the few books that wasn't about strategy or warfare. Across the room, Marco sat at his massive desk, reading reports with the same intensity he brought to everything. The only sounds were the gentle rustle of turning pages and the occasional clink of Elena's coffee cup against its saucer. It felt almost normal, peaceful. Elena watched him over the rim of her cup. In the morning light, his usual severity seemed softened somehow. His jacket was draped over his chair, shirt sleeves rolled to expose strong forearms. A lock of dark hair had fallen across his forehead, making him look younger, almost approachable. "You're staring," he said, without looking up. Heat crept into Elena's cheeks. "I was just thinking." "About?" "How quiet it is." She set her cup down. "Almost like the world outside doesn't exist." Now he did look up, dark eyes meeting hers. "Would you prefer it didn't?" Before she could answer, piercing alarms shattered the morning calm. Marco was on his feet instantly, his peaceful demeanor vanishing as he grabbed his phone. "Report!" he barked into it. His expression darkened at whatever he heard. "Lock down the east wing. I want teams 2 and 3. The distinctive pop of gunfire cut him off. Elena's book tumbled to the floor as she stood, heart pounding. "Marco!" He crossed the room in 3 long strides, grabbing her arm. "We need to move, now!" "What's happening?" Bianchi hit squad. His grip tightened as he pulled her toward the door. "They've breached the outer perimeter." Elena's blood ran cold. "My husband's family?" "Yes." Marco's voice was clipped as he hurried her down the hallway. "They're here for you." More gunfire echoed, closer now. Marco picked up his pace, practically dragging Elena along. They rounded a corner and she saw a massive steel door set into the wall. "What is that?" "Panic room!" Marco pressed his palm to a hidden scanner. The door swung open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a small but well-equipped space. "Get inside!" Elena planted her feet. "Not until you tell me what's really happening." Frustration flashed across Marco's face. "This isn't the time! I deserve to know why people are trying to kill me." A bullet pinged off the wall behind them, sending marble chips flying. Marco didn't hesitate. He grabbed Elena around the waist and physically lifted her into the panic room. "Stay here," he ordered, eyes intense. "Don't open this door for anyone but me." "Marco, wait!" But he was already stepping back, the heavy door swinging shut. Elena rushed to the small, reinforced window set into it, pressing her hands against the bulletproof glass. What she saw next would be burned into her memory forever. 3 men rounded the corner, weapons raised. Marco moved like liquid violence, ducking under the first spray of bullets, closing the distance before they could adjust their aim. His elbow crushed the first attacker's throat. He used the dying man's body as a shield while drawing his own weapon, putting 2 precise shots into the second attacker's chest. The third man managed to get off a shot that grazed Marco's shoulder, tearing his shirt. Marco's response was devastatingly efficient, a sweep of the legs followed by a single shot to the head as the man fell. The entire fight lasted less than 30 seconds. Elena watched, horrified and fascinated, as Marco checked each body with clinical detachment. His movements were calm, practiced. This wasn't the first time he'd done this. When he straightened, blood had soaked through his torn shirt, though Elena couldn't tell if it was his or his attackers. More gunfire echoed from elsewhere in the mansion, followed by screams. Marco spoke rapidly into his phone, coordinating his security teams. Elena could only catch fragments. "Sweep the grounds. No survivors. Make an example." When Marco finally returned to the panic room, his shirt was sticky with blood, but his hands were steady as he entered the code. Elena stumbled back as the door opened, her mind struggling to reconcile the brutal efficiency she'd just witnessed with the man who'd watched her so gently over breakfast. Marco stepped inside, his eyes scanning her for injuries, despite the fact that she'd been safely locked away. "Are you hurt?" Elena shook her head, unable to find her voice. His hands came up to cup her face, thumbs brushing her cheeks with impossible gentleness. The same hands that had dealt death moments ago now touched her like she was made of spun glass. She could feel them trembling slightly, the only sign that the fighting had affected him at all. "I told you," he said softly. "No one will harm you while you're under my protection." Elena reached up, touching his bloodied shoulder. "You're injured." "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." Her voice cracked. "They could have killed you." Something dark and fierce flashed in Marco's eyes. "They could have killed you! That's why they had to die." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Marco's security teams were reporting in through his earpiece, all threats neutralized, police en route, cleanup crews standing by. "We need to move," Marco said, but his hands remained gentle on her face. "Can you walk?" Elena nodded, but her legs felt unsteady. Marco must have noticed because he swept her into his arms without warning, cradling her against his chest, as if she weighed nothing. "Close your eyes," he murmured against her hair. "You don't need to see the aftermath." Elena buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in his scent. Gunpowder now mixed with his usual cologne. The sirens grew louder as Marco carried her away from the panic room, his stride smooth despite his injury. She should have been terrified by what she'd witnessed, should have been repulsed by the violence, by the casual way he'd taken lives. Instead, all she could think about was how he'd positioned himself between her and danger without hesitation, how his touch remained gentle even with adrenaline coursing through his system, how he'd killed to protect her and then looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. The implications of those thoughts terrified her more than any violence could. Through his shirt, she could feel Marco's heart beating steady and strong, at odds with the chaos around them. Police sirens pierced the air outside as he carried her through his blood-stained halls, and Elena realized there was no going back from this moment. She was irreversibly entangled in Marco's dangerous world now, and the most frightening part was how safe she felt in his arms, even as sirens screamed and the metallic scent of blood filled the air. The mansion felt different after the bloodshed. Elena watched the sunset from Marco's study, the golden light unable to warm the chill that had settled in her bones. The cleanup crews had erased all evidence of the morning's violence, but she couldn't forget what she'd witnessed. Marco sat across from her, his shoulder professionally bandaged, his usual pristine suit replaced with a simple black shirt. The events of the day seemed to have cracked something in his carefully maintained facade. "Why do you live here alone?" Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. "Everyone speaks of you like you're more legend than man." Marco's fingers tightened around his glass of whiskey. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades of silence. "I wasn't always alone." He stared into his glass as if it held memories instead of alcohol. 30 years ago, I was different, younger, softer. His laugh was hollow. I thought I could have both, power and love. Elena leaned forward, drawn by the raw pain in his voice. What happened? Her name was Sophia. The name seemed to physically hurt him. She worked in my father's household. We fell in love in secret, planned to run away together. He took a long drink. My father discovered us. He saw an opportunity. The study grew darker as the sun disappeared, but neither moved to turn on the lights. In the growing shadows, Marco's face looked carved from stone. He gave me a choice, take my place as his heir and end things with Sophia, or watch her family suffer. I hesitated. His voice dropped to a whisper. That hesitation cost Sophia her life. Elena's heart clenched. Your father had her killed to teach me a lesson. Marco's knuckles went white around his glass. Love makes you weak, he said. Hesitation gets people killed. He was right about the second part. That's why you live alone, because of what he did. Because of what I did. Marco set down his glass with careful precision. I hesitated. I thought I could find a way to save both her and her family. If I had chosen immediately, chosen power like my father wanted, she might have lived. Instead, my indecision signed her death warrant. Elena rose from her chair, moving around his desk. You were young. You were trying to protect everyone. And I protected no one. His voice was bitter. So I learned. I became what my father wanted. Cold, decisive, feared. No one has entered this house since that day. No one has gotten close enough to become leverage. Until me, Elena said softly. Marco's eyes met hers, and the raw emotion in them stole her breath. Until you. Without thinking, Elena reached out and covered his hand with hers. Marco went completely still, staring at their joined hands as if they were something foreign and fascinating. You're not the monster they think you are, she whispered. He turned toward her, and suddenly they were inches apart. Elena could see the battle in his eyes, 30 years of isolation warring with something deeper, something that made his gaze drop to her lips. For a heartbeat, she thought he would kiss her. Her heart thundered in her chest as he leaned closer, his free hand coming up to brush her cheek. Then he jerked away, standing so abruptly his chair scraped against the floor. You deserve better than this, he said roughly. Better than a world of violence and death. Better than men like me. Marco, you should rest. He wouldn't look at her. It's been a long day. Elena knew a dismissal when she heard one. She walked to the study door on unsteady legs, her hand still tingling where it had touched his. At the threshold, she paused. The monster wouldn't feel guilty, she said quietly. The monster wouldn't care about protecting anyone. She didn't wait for his response, making her way back to her room through the darkened halls. Her mind raced with everything she'd learned, everything she'd felt in that moment when he'd almost kissed her. In her room, Elena pressed her fingers to her lips, remembering how close they'd been. The pain in Marco's eyes haunted her, not just for Sophia, but for the decades of loneliness that followed. She understood now why he held himself apart, why he'd built walls so high. What terrified her most wasn't the growing warmth in her chest when she thought of him, or even the violence she'd witnessed. It was the realization that she wanted to be the one to break through those walls, even knowing the danger that lay behind them. Dawn brought storm clouds and worse news. Marco's face was granite as he strode into Elena's room, his phone still in his hand. Pack what you need in, he ordered. We're leaving in 10 minutes. Elena looked up from her coffee. What's happened? Your husband. Marco's jaw clenched. He's arranging to send you overseas, a family exile that's really a sale to the highest bidder. Her cup clattered against the saucer. He's selling me? Not if I can help it. Marco's voice held lethal promise. There's a safe house prepared. We leave now. The drive was tense, winding through back roads until they reached a cottage nestled in dense woods. Inside, Elena found warm wood furnishings, soft blankets, and a fully stocked kitchen. Marco had clearly prepared it for her comfort. It's temporary, he assured her. Just until I handle the Bianchis. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. Passing Marco's study, she heard his voice, low and deadly. Listen carefully, he was saying. Either you sign annulment papers, or I'll ensure you never father children with anyone. Your choice. Elena's blood boiled. She burst through the door. How dare you? Marco turned, phone still at his ear. I'll call back. You're making decisions about my life without even asking me. Elena's hands shook. Just like them. I'm protecting you. By controlling me, I need to make my own choices, Marco. I need my dignity back. His face softened. Elena. No. She backed away. I can't trade one cage for another, even a gilded one. That night, after Marco retired, Elena packed essentials into a small bag. At midnight, she slipped out the back door into the darkness, leaving behind the man who would burn the world to protect her, but couldn't understand she needed to protect herself. Elena's boots crunched on gravel as she hurried down the dark rural road. The moon cast just enough light to make out the bus station sign in the distance. Her heart hammered, but determination pushed her forward. Freedom waited just a mile ahead. Headlights suddenly flooded the road behind her. A black SUV crawled closer, engine purring like a predator. Before she could run, car doors slammed. Rough hands grabbed her arms. She kicked and screamed, but the Bianchi enforcers were merciless as they dragged her inside. At the safe house, Marco ended his call with his intelligence chief. Elena? His voice echoed through empty rooms. Finding her bed, cold and closet ransacked, raw panic seized his chest. For the first time in 30 years, his legendary control shattered. Find her! He roared into his phone. Within minutes, every Venturi soldier mobilized. Marco himself cornered informants in dark alleys, his hands stained with the blood of those who hesitated to answer. Hours passed in a blur of interrogations and threats. The Bianchis, one bloodied man finally gasped. Warehouse district. In a dim warehouse across town, Elena's wrist burned against rope restraints. A single bulb swung overhead, casting moving shadows. Footsteps approached, expensive shoes on concrete. Her husband emerged from the darkness, his smile cruel. My dear wife, he sneered, circling her chair. Did you think you could escape our family? He gripped her chin, forcing her to look up. This time, we'll dispose of you properly. No more embarrassing scenes in alleyways. Elena stared back, refusing to show fear even as terror froze her blood. She had traded one nightmare for another, and now she could only pray Marco would find her in time. The first rays of dawn painted the city sky blood red as Marco Venturi unleashed hell. His polished shoes, now scuffed and spattered, carried him through the underworld's darkest corners. One by one, Bianchi's safe houses fell. He dragged lieutenants into alleys, breaking fingers until they spoke. Please, one begged, spitting teeth. We don't know where she is. Marco's reputation for cold control had shattered. Whispers spread through criminal circles. The untouchable Venturi boss had finally cracked. All because of a woman. His fury touched every corner of the underground, leaving broken bodies and burning buildings in his wake. In the warehouse, Elena faced her own battle. Her husband paced before her, his designer suit immaculate while her face bore fresh bruises. You want the truth, he sneered. I've always been the infertile one, but a Bianchi man can't be broken. You were the perfect scapegoat, young, naive, expendable. Something snapped inside Elena. With strength born of rage, she lurched up, chair and all, slamming it sideways into his legs. As he stumbled, she clawed at his face, drawing blood. You will never own me again, she screamed, her voice raw with defiance. Even as his men subdued her, she kept fighting, spitting in his face. Marco found the last Bianchi captain hiding in a basement brothel. After 30 minutes alone with him, the captain revealed everything, including the compound's location. In his garage, Marco methodically loaded weapons into his car. Pistols, shotguns, enough ammunition to start a war. His hands moved with deadly precision as he prepared to rescue Elena, alone. The engine roared to life as he pulled out, his expression carved from stone. The time for negotiation had ended. Elena's wrists burned against the rough rope binding her to the metal post. The warehouse's dim light cast long shadows across the concrete floor where Bianchi men paced, weapons ready. Her husband watched from his makeshift throne, a folding chair, positioned like a king, overseeing an execution. The first explosion rocked the building's foundation. Dust rained from the ceiling as emergency lights flashed red. Through the chaos, Elena heard it, methodical footsteps followed by screams. Marco moved like death itself. Each shot found its mark with terrifying precision. Bodies fell as he advanced, his expensive suit now dark with other men's blood. When a guard rushed him with a knife, Marco's response was brutally efficient. One twist, one snap, another body on the floor. He reached her while still firing his final shots, dropping to his knees to slice through her bonds. His hands trembled as they touched her face, checking for injuries. I'm sorry. Elena whispered, her voice breaking. I shouldn't have run. I want you. Not because I'm trapped, but because I choose you. Marco's eyes softened, even as gunfire erupted behind him. You're not my weakness, Elena. You're my reason for living. He spun as Elena's husband charged with a pistol. The fight was swift and savage. When it ended, the man who had tormented Elena lay still, his threats silenced forever. Marco gathered her close, his heartbeat strong against her cheek. Let's go home, he murmured. This time, when they drove through the estate gates, Elena wasn't a captive, but a woman who held every key to Marco's guarded heart. She had found freedom not in running, but in choosing to stay. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.